The morning it all changed, Zola was still wearing her cleaning uniform. She had not even taken off her shoes yet. The buses ran late that Thursday, and by the time she reached the bottom of the hill where her mother's house sat, small, patched at the corners, its blue paint fading the way old things do when no one has the money or the time. The sun had already gone low and orange behind the eucalyptus trees. Zola pushed open the gate with her hip because the latch had been broken for 3 months, and she told herself the same thing she always did. Next week, I will fix it next week. She never did, of course. There was always something else first. Zola Mensah was 26 years old, and she cleaned the floors at St. Augustine's private hospital every day from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. She wore a pale green uniform with her name stitched in white thread on the left side of her chest, and she moved through those wide hallways with a mop and a cart and a pair of headphones around her neck that she never actually used, because she liked to hear what was happening around her. She liked to know. The other cleaners talked amongst themselves, mostly. There were 4 of them on the morning shift. Zola, a quiet woman named Perpetua who was close to retirement, and 2 younger men, Junior and Kofi, who were cousins and spent their breaks arguing about football. None of them were close. That was fine. Zola was not the kind of person who needed closeness to function. What Zola was, above everything else, was observant. She noticed the old man the very first morning he appeared. 3 weeks into her second year at St. Augustine's, he was sitting in the far corner of the ground floor waiting area near the internal pharmacy window. Not the main waiting area with the plastic chairs arranged in rows and the television mounted high on the wall, but the smaller alcove off to the side where people went when they did not want to be seen. He wore a long grey overcoat that was too warm for the season, and leather shoes so old the color had rubbed entirely off the toes. He had a cane propped against his knee, and his hands folded on top of it, and he was not looking at anything in particular. Zola noticed him the way she noticed everything, quietly, without making a scene of it. She mopped around his corner without saying anything. He did not say anything either, but as she passed, she saw that the small paper bag from the pharmacy counter had slipped from his hand onto the floor, and she picked it up and set it on the seat beside him, and he looked at her, really looked at her, and nodded once, slowly, the way people do when they mean something more than thank you. She thought nothing of it. She went back to her cart and moved on to the next hallway, but he was there the next morning. And the morning after that. By the end of that first week, Zola had begun to understand that the old man, she did not know his name then, was coming to the hospital not because he was sick, but because he had nowhere else to go in the mornings. This was something she understood without needing anyone to explain it to her. There were people like that in every city, and most people around them simply adjusted their line of sight so as not to see them directly. It was easier that way. Zola did not adjust her line of sight. On the Friday of that first week, she brought an extra piece of the mango she'd packed for herself and set it on the bench beside him without a word. He looked at it, then he looked at her. She had already walked away. That was how it started. The second person you need to know about is Rochelle. Rochelle Aubert had worked at St. Augustine's for 11 years. She was a ward coordinator, which meant she managed the schedules and the paperwork for the 3rd floor. But she had spent so long in the building that she treated the entire hospital as her personal domain. She was the kind of woman who knew every face and used that knowledge the way a card player uses a good hand, strategically, and always to her own advantage. She did not like Zola. This was not something she admitted directly. Rochelle was too clever for that. What she did instead was smaller, quieter, more difficult to name. She filed maintenance complaints about the ground floor section just after Zola had finished it, so the supervisor would find a streak on the linoleum or a smudge on the glass and write it up as Zola's error. She commented, in meetings, in passing, about the cleaning staff needing more supervision and accountability, and she always said it while looking at Zola's general direction without making actual eye contact, so that if anyone called her out she could say she'd meant no one in particular. She had been doing this for almost a year before Zola noticed. When Zola did notice, she said nothing. She simply started photographing her work when she finished each section. A quiet, quick photo on her phone, just the floor and the timestamp, and she saved them in a folder labeled Evidence, which she hoped she would never need to use. She was that kind of person, prepared but not aggressive, watchful but not paranoid. She kept herself steady the way a person keeps a candle steady in a draught, cupped carefully, leaning into the wind just slightly, never quite going out. The old man's name was Ferdinand. She learned this in the 3rd week, not because he told her, but because she heard a nurse call out Mr. Ferdinand when he stopped at the pharmacy window to collect a prescription, and he turned his head in that slow, deliberate way. Ferdinand came every weekday morning. Sometimes he stayed until 9, sometimes until 11. He sat in his corner with his cane and his overcoat and a small worn notebook that he opened occasionally and wrote in with a pen he kept in his breast pocket. He never seemed to be in distress. He just seemed to be present, in the way that older people sometimes are, quietly anchored to a place in a way the young rarely understand. Zola began bringing him food. It was not dramatic. She did not announce it. She simply started packing an extra container in her bag each morning, something her mama had made the night before. Jollof rice or fried plantain, or a bit of stew wrapped over bread, and she left it beside him on her first pass, through the alcove. He always waited until she had moved on before he opened it. She appreciated that. It meant they had an understanding. There was a morning in the 5th week when she arrived and he was already there, and he looked worse than usual, pale in a way that crossed racial lines, the grayish pallor of exhaustion, his hands not quite steady on the cane. Zola stopped her cart. "Did you sleep?" she asked. He looked at her with something that might have been surprise, or might have been relief that someone had asked. "Not particularly," he said. His voice was low and careful, the accent British underneath something older. "Okay," she said. She reached into her bag and handed him a small thermos of tea that her mama had packed without knowing who it was for. "Drink this first." He took it with both hands. Zola went back to mopping. Those were the kinds of mornings that made everything else worth it. Rochelle found out about the food in the 7th week. Zola had known it was only a matter of time. Rochelle made it her business to know things, and she had probably seen the containers or noticed the old man's corner being treated differently from the rest of the waiting area. Whatever the path was, she arrived at the knowledge and she used it. She brought it to Mr. Hargreaves, the hospital administrator, on a Wednesday. Zola was called into his office that same afternoon. She sat across from him at his wide desk with her hands folded in her lap, and he looked uncomfortable in the way that administrators often do when they have to enforce rules they do not personally believe in. "There have been concerns," he said, "about external individuals being given food or personal items on hospital property. There are hygiene considerations, liability considerations." "I understand," Zola said. "The concern is that it sets a precedent." "I understand the concern," Zola said again carefully. "Is there a formal policy being invoked, or is this a verbal warning?" Mr. Hargreaves paused. "A verbal warning, at this time. Then I've heard it," Zola said. "Thank you." She stood, nodded, and left. In the hallway outside his office, she stopped for a moment with her back against the wall and took 3 slow breaths. She was not going to stop bringing Ferdinand his food. She simply needed to think about how to be less visible about it. What she did not know, could not have known, was that Rochelle was not finished. The following Monday, Rochelle submitted a written complaint. This one was different from the maintenance grievances. It cited repeated violations, failure to comply after verbal warning, and potential risk to hospital reputation. It requested a review of Zola's employment contract. Zola found out through Perpetua, who had heard Rochelle speaking to someone in the staff room and had the decency to quietly find Zola and tell her what she'd heard. "What are you going to do?" Perpetua asked. She was a small woman, always careful, and she looked genuinely worried. "I'm going to finish my shift," Zola said. "Zola, I'm going to finish my shift," Zola said again, "and then I'm going to go home, and I'm going to make sure my mama eats dinner." She did exactly that. She mopped every hallway that afternoon with the same care she brought to every other day. She did not cut corners. She did not rush. When she passed Ferdinand's corner on her final circuit, he was still there, the worn notebook open on his knee. He looked up at her. She gave him a small nod. He gave one back. She went home. The review happened on a Thursday morning 3 weeks later, in a small room with a round table and a window that looked out onto the parking structure. Zola sat on one side. Rochelle sat across from her, composed and still, with a folder of printed documents arranged in front of her. Mr. Hargreaves sat at the head. There was also a man Zola had not met before, introduced only as Mr. Annan, from the hospital's parent organization's regional oversight office. He had said almost nothing during the first 20 minutes. He sat with his jacket buttoned and a pen in his hand, and watched everything with the particular attention of someone who is assessing rather than participating. Rochelle presented her case methodically. Repeated warnings, violations of hygiene protocol, potential liability. The way she said it, Zola sounded like a negligent employee at best and a reckless one at worst. When she finished, Mr. Hargreaves turned to Zola. "Do you have anything to add?" Zola placed her phone on the table and opened the folder she had labeled evidence 14 months earlier. Photographs of completed work, time-stamped. The maintenance complaints Rochelle had filed. She had gotten copies through a Freedom of Information request she had submitted quietly 3 months prior because she had known this day was coming. Notes she had kept about dates and times. A record that was careful, organized, and impossible to dismiss. She did not speak loudly. She did not raise her voice. She simply walked Mr. Hargreaves through the documents one by one and let them speak for themselves. Mr. Annan, at the head of the table, had stopped taking notes. He was watching Zola. By the end of the meeting, Mr. Hargreaves was very quiet. Rochelle's composure had shifted. Not broken, but altered, the way a mirror shifts when the angle of the light changes. No decision was announced that day. They told Zola the review committee would be in touch. She walked out into the corridor, past the pharmacy window, past Ferdinand's corner. Empty that morning he had not come, and she went back to her cart and she finished her shift. 3 days later, on a Sunday, Zola's mother, everyone called her Mama Saffron, a name that had originated with Zola's father and stuck even after he was gone, was sitting on the front step shelling beans when a car pulled up outside the gate. It was not just a car. It was a large, black vehicle with tinted windows and very clean wheels. The kind of car that does not belong in a neighborhood like theirs, not because the neighborhood is bad, but because the car is accustomed to a different kind of road. Mama Saffron set down her beans. She watched it. The driver got out first. He was in his 40s, in a dark jacket, and he walked around the front of the car and opened the rear door carefully, professionally. The man who stepped out was wearing a suit the color of charcoal, with a white handkerchief folded precisely in the breast pocket. He was in his late 60s, perhaps older. He walked with a cane, the same cane Zola would realize later, though in this context it looked different. Everything looked different. Mama Saffron stood up slowly. "Good morning," said Ferdinand. "I am looking for Zola." Mama Saffron said nothing for a long moment. She looked at the car. She looked at the man with the cane. Then she turned her head and called into the house. "Zola, come outside." Zola appeared in the doorway, still holding the dish towel she'd been using to dry the breakfast things. She looked at her mother's face first, which told her something was happening, and then she looked at the gate, and then she saw Ferdinand. She had not seen him outside the hospital before. It was a disorienting thing. The way a person can exist entirely in one context in your mind and then appear somewhere else and briefly not make sense, like a word used in the wrong sentence. "Ferdinand," she said. "Zola," he said. He was smiling, just slightly, the careful smile of a man who has rehearsed very little of what he intends to say. "May I come in?" They sat in the small front room on the chairs with the embroidered cushions that Mama Saffron kept for company. The driver stayed outside by the car. Nobody quite acknowledged this. Ferdinand set his cane against the arm of his chair and was quiet for a moment, looking around the room the way people do when they want to understand a person through their surroundings. "I owe you an explanation," he said finally. "You don't owe me anything," Zola said. "Perhaps not, but I'd like to give you one regardless." His name, his full name, was Ferdinand Owusu Boateng. He had been the founding director of the Owusu Boateng Health Foundation, which funded 6 hospitals and 11 clinics across 3 provinces. He had retired from active management 4 years ago and handed the directorship to his son. The hospital he came to every morning, St. Augustine's, had been the first one the foundation had ever funded. He came back to it sometimes, in the early mornings, because it was where he had spent the most important years of his professional life. And sometimes old men needed to sit in places that remembered who they used to be. He had started arriving in the worn overcoat deliberately. He wanted to walk through a place he had built and see it as a stranger would, without the deference and the held doors, and the names spoken in a particular tone of voice. He wanted to see what was actually happening. What he had seen, among other things, was Zola. Zola was quiet for a long time after he finished. Mama Saffron, sitting beside her, had stopped pretending to look at anything other than the man with the cane. "Why are you here?" Zola asked. "Today, specifically. Why today?" Ferdinand reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and placed a folded letter on the low table between them. Zola unfolded it slowly. It was on official letterhead. It was addressed to her. It was an offer of appointment to a newly created position. Patient Experience and Care Quality Coordinator, St. Augustine's Private Hospital and affiliated foundation sites. A salary more than 3 times what she currently earned. Full benefits. A start date in 4 weeks. She read it twice. "This is because of what you saw," she said. "This is because of what you are," Ferdinand said. "What I saw confirmed something. But the offer is based on what the role requires, and you are what it requires." Zola set the letter down on the table. She looked at it. "What happened with the review?" she asked. "Review was closed," Ferdinand said. Mr. Annan submitted his assessment to the Foundation's board on Friday. His recommendation was that the complaint be dismissed and that the conduct of the individual who filed it be formally examined. Zola looked up. "Rochelle?" "Yes." Ferdinand said it without elaboration, without satisfaction, without drama, just the word and the weight behind it. Mama Saffron made a sound that was not quite a word and looked away toward the window. "You don't have to decide today," Ferdinand said. "The offer stands for 2 weeks, but I wanted to bring it myself rather than send it by post." "Why?" Zola asked. He looked at her directly. "Because you brought me tea," he said, "when you did not have to, and you asked me if I had slept. And I am old enough to know that people who do things like that deserve to have good news delivered to their door, not through a mail slot." Zola accepted the position. She did not accept it that day in the front room with the embroidered cushions, because she was not the kind of person who made decisions quickly when the decisions were large ones. She went home that evening and sat at the kitchen table with Mama Saffron, and they went through the letter together 3 times. And they talked about it for 2 hours. And then Mama Saffron made tea, and they sat with it and said nothing for a while, the way people do when the right answer is already clear, but they want to be sure they are the ones choosing it. She called the number on the letterhead the following morning. She gave her 2 weeks' notice to Mr. Hargreaves, who received it with a look that was equal parts guilt and relief. She cleaned her last shift at St. Augustine's on a Friday, and she mopped every hallway exactly as she had mopped it every other day for 2 years, because that was the kind of person she was. Perpetua found her at the end of the shift and hugged her without saying anything. Junior and Kofi gave her a card that had a picture of a lion on the front and signatures from every member of the morning cleanings staff inside, including 2 people she hadn't realized knew her name. She kept it. She did not see Rochelle on her last day. She heard through Perpetua that Rochelle had been placed on administrative leave pending a formal conduct review. She heard this and felt nothing dramatic about it. Not satisfaction, not sorrow. Just a kind of quiet acknowledgement, the way you acknowledge a fact that you already knew would eventually become true. The new office was on the 2nd floor of the Foundation's main administrative building, a 20-minute drive from St. Augustine's. It had a window that looked out onto a courtyard with a large tree in it, and on her first morning, Zola arrived early and sat at the desk and looked at the tree for a while before anyone else came in. Ferdinand's son, whose name was Kobe, and who was 38 years old and ran the foundation with the particular energy of someone who had grown up inside a great institution and understood it completely, came to introduce himself mid-morning. He was easier to talk to than she had expected. He asked her what she thought the most important thing was that the Foundation's sites could do better for patients and staff. And she told him, clearly and without hedging, exactly what she thought. He listened the way his father had listened, carefully, without performing attention. "Good," he said when she finished. "Write it up and send it to me. I want to take it to the board next month." She wrote it up that afternoon. 3 months later, Zola was sitting with Ferdinand in the same alcove off the ground floor waiting area of St. Augustine's because she still visited the site regularly as part of her new role. He came on Tuesday mornings now rather than every day. He had told her this was because he had more to do with his time these days, which she understood to mean that someone was looking after him more carefully than before. He had the worn notebook on his knee, the same one as always. "Are you writing anything interesting?" she asked. He looked down at it. "I've been writing down the names of people who were kind to me when they didn't have to be," he said. "It's a longer list than I expected." Zola looked at the notebook. "Am I in there?" He opened it to a page near the front, and she saw her name written at the top in his careful, deliberate handwriting, and below it a single line, "Brought tea. Asked if I had slept." Meant both. She looked at it for a moment. Then she looked away, out toward the main corridor where the morning light came in through the long windows and lay in bright rectangles across the clean floor. "You have good handwriting," she said. Ferdinand closed the notebook. "My mother taught me," he said. They sat there for a while, in the corner where it had all started, while the hospital moved around them the way hospitals do, urgently and steadily and always, regardless of what any particular life inside it was doing. The gate at Mama Saffron's house had a new latch on it now. Zola had fixed it the week after she accepted the job. It had not taken long at all.